if they did go for De Zerbi, is taking 2 managers away from Brighton, thinking, well, the first one's failed, so the second one's going to fail. But I'm convinced he will be a top manager. I think the way he's got Brighton playing, I think that's what Chelsea need to be doing. As Frank said, I can't see the big boys going to Chelsea, maybe for a payday. Going back to the point of the players being a little bit gutted, me and Shaka and Frank know what players are like. We look after ourselves. If a manager changes when you're there, it's sad, of course it is, but you bounce back within a day because you've got personal pride, and they will move on to the next best friend, which is a new manager. So in short, I think De Zerbi would be a great fit.
I think and again, I'm going to do as James Oy did, hear me out here. If Todd Bowley is determined to build a long-term legacy under one manager, I think if you're doing that, the first thing you have to get is that manager.
Right.
Right. Okay. You've already made.
You know what my next question is going to be.
You've already signed players, as James pointed out, to 7 or 8 year contracts. I think it's between Pochettino and Nagelsmann.
Right.
If I'm thinking long term, somebody who I know is going to stay there, is going to endure some of the both the high and low times in building that club and in building the foundations for that long term legacy. Those are the two who come easiest to mind.
Don, why did you pull a face at Shaka?
Because I had the conversation with a German journalist last week talking about Nagelsmann for Tottenham, and he thinks he's a very stubborn manager, a very young manager who's got a lot to learn, and he likes to micromanage players. He likes to literally put them in certain positions and doesn't allow players to play with a lot of freedom. Frank's right. He managed Hoffenheim and Leipzig when he's working with smaller players, and he gets, I think, more of a tune out of younger players. But working with egos and big-name players, I don't think helped him at Bayern. So it's an easy fit in terms of just being sacked from Bayern. Must be a good manager. We'll take him. I would see a long-term future in De Zerbi more than Nagelsmann.
James?
Yeah, I think there's a point to just make here about one of the reasons why the Thomas Tuchel appointment Thomas Tuchel was sacked, essentially, was that there was an argument in pre-season that Todd Bowley wanted to sign Cristiano Ronaldo from Manchester United. And he was offered Tuchel was offered the chance repeatedly. He said, look, it's Cristiano Ronaldo, why don't we sign him? And Tuchel was absolutely adamant about this is a disaster. I understand why you're thinking about it. He's been a great player, but he is no longer the player that you think he might be. He is occupying his position on reputation alone. And I think that's quite symptomatic of where Todd Bowley maybe might be thinking now, because Graham Potter was a progressive appointment. You know, I think everybody in England thought, look, he's done very well at Brighton. It's nice to see an English manager get a chance at a top club in the Premier League, but there was no guarantee that he could succeed. He's not managed at that level. He's never managed in the Champions League. I remember, you know, a few people wincing in the press conferences when he was sort of saying, oh, I've never even been to a Champions League game. Oh, this is nice. Oh, I've never been to the San Siro before. And you're thinking, God, this is a Chelsea manager. You know, think of the people who've occupied that seat before, real kind of, you know, proper authoritarian managers who you know, really carry a gravitas. When you think now that Zinedine Zidane, Luis Enrique, these sort of sexy names, these attractive names are on the market, is Todd Bowley going to stick to that vision? I know he's obviously abandoned it in terms of the identity of the manager, but is he going to think, oh, actually, I do want a younger manager, a progressive manager. I want someone to be able to take a step up and you know, prove themselves at the highest level, rather than taking someone who's maybe on the managerial merry-go-round at the highest level. That's a huge call for him to make now, because obviously the first appointment they've made has gone so badly wrong. Does he think, oh, actually, going back to the Ronaldo idea of, well, let's get Ronaldo in, he's brilliant. They might say, well, let's get Zidane in. Look what he's won. Or let's get Luis Enrique in. What a player he was. What a manager he's been. And if they do that, it will just be that sort of lurch towards the short-termism that is an absolute counter to everything that they've been briefing and speaking about, both publicly and privately, about how they want to take this club forward. And they face a massive decision now about that, about the identity of the manager that they want to go with. Are they prepared to trust another manager? Because you would suggest that they would have done that with Potter. But the first sign of thinking, oh, actually, we're going to miss out on top four, maybe even European football altogether, well, actually, let's get rid of him and maybe go and get a big name for a short-term fix.
Can we just show the signings that they've made under Todd Boehly? You take a look at this list, and obviously it's extensive. There aren't that many players that walk into a Manchester City or indeed an Arsenal side here, Don. So not only is a manager going to come in and dealing with players that aren't of the highest quality with expectations around Chelsea because the money they've spent is quite high, but a lot of these names are bang average. And a lot of these names, as James told us, are on big, long contracts.
True. I mean, Enzo Fernandez might. But apart from that, Mudryk is a very raw player. And, he's never a £88 million player. I mean, look down the list. Like Badiashile, I think, is a really good signing. There's some 3 or 4 young players on there, Dan, that you'd like to think might have bright futures. I'm amazed that Chukwuemeka has not had more game time. He was a fantastic young signing from Villa when Real Madrid, Liverpool, Barcelona were all keeping an eye on him. So I think he's one for the future, but must play more. But it's still not a bad list. But you're right.
It's not a great list, Don. It's not brilliant, is it?
No, you're right. It's not like they're signing. No, it's not like they're signing the blue chip player. There's not many blue chip players on there apart from Enzo Fernandez, who cost what was it, 115 million. So you're right. I think City and the top clubs are signing the blue chip players. I think with Chelsea, they're trying to do it a little bit different. It's like Todd Boehly's going in and going, right, money's the answer. We've got loads of money. We've bought the club for £4.5 billion. Let's spend £600 million, because if we spend £600 million on paper, that means we must be competing for the top 4 or competing for the number 1 spot. Well, I'm not even sure Todd Boehly realised that you have to finish in the top 4 to get Champions League football. So it's all just a little bit. Don. It's all just a little bit scattergun in terms of the signings, the approach. If you're buying or you're bringing in Graham Potter and you're buying young players, I can see that. I can see the vision and I can see where you want to go. At the same time, if you're losing games in the Premier League and you're in the bottom half, that vision just ain't going to last.
James, you said not to expect any sort of announcements over the next few days. April the 12th is kind of the key day, isn't it? That's the first leg against Real Madrid. If you're Todd Boehly and if you're Chelsea, surely you want your man in charge ahead of that quarter-final, as opposed to an interim coach who's still associated, let's face it, with Graham Potter.
Well, ideally, yeah, but I mean, they're not solely in control of that, are they? I mean, if you're Mauricio Pochettino, if you're Julian Nagelsmann, do you want to take that job at that moment in time, knowing the state that squad's in? And do you want to go into a Champions League quarter-final against the defending champions, knowing you're underdogs, on a kind of hiding to nothing, starting on the back foot, obviously without a pre-season, without any time to really train? I mean, that game's what, 10 days away? 11 days away? It would be... I mean, money would be the answer. If they offer a huge salary, maybe a manager would come in that time. But everything that I'm hearing out of Chelsea tonight is that they don't expect an immediate appointment. And I think if you contrast this with the Bayern situation, where, again, my understanding there was the reason they got rid of Nagelsmann was not because they wanted to get rid of Nagelsmann then. It was because they realised they could get Tuchel now. And there was a suggestion that Tottenham were talking to Tuchel. I don't think anything had got very advanced, but I think Tottenham had an eye on Tuchel and thought, well, actually, we need to move quickly here to get their man. And that's why the timing of that decision to sack Nagelsmann was when it was. I mean, Nagelsmann was on the Austrian ski slopes when he found out. You know, that doesn't suggest to me that was done on the basis of we need to sack this manager because he's lost the dressing room, because we need to get rid of him for X, Y, Z reasons, whatever. This has been done because we can get his replacement and we can do that now. That's not happened here with Chelsea. They've reached a point where they've thought, we really, really wanted to back this guy, and they've lost again at home. It's very symptomatic. What did they have? 27, 28 shots, XG over 2, 69% possession, couldn't score. You know, it's a very familiar pattern, and I think the sort of cyclical nature of these defeats has left Chelsea thinking we just need to make a change, rather than thinking, actually, let's do this with a view to getting someone in now. Because, as I say, if you're a top coach, why would you take a job in April when you could take it in June, July, August with a much better bargaining position, with a full pre-season, and know exactly what you're walking into, especially, again, when we say, well, there might be 2 or 3 other top jobs on the market this summer.
What are you waving around about for, Frank?
Just to answer to your question, I completely disagree. I think no coach, mentally stable will take the job before the 2 legs of the Champions League, because he knows that if it doesn't go through, fans are going to start to have doubts, and therefore will not trust him and his job. So he's going to be already in trouble just before starting anything, because, as James said, it's like 8-10 days before the game is on, the first game, the first tie. So no way for me, if anybody would desperately want somebody, no way I think somebody will just think through, would go and get the job, because no, you go into trouble. It's what I said before in some previous show. Keep Potter until you're out of the Champions League, and then you decide what you have to do. Because I thought through that no coach will go, and you will be in the middle of nowhere, and you won't know what to do. But again, no coach will take the job before the 2 legs.
You'd take it for the money, Frank. Of course you would.
Me?
Yeah.
You give me only half of the salary of Graham Potter, I go for Chelsea.
Yeah,
but I tell you,
can buy some
in the
new
dressing
clothes.
room, I will buy some new clothes to please you. But I tell you, they will hear another song. The players, they will hear a different song. Yeah, for sure.
Just to wrap all this up, James, Graham Potter to Chelsea. Oh, Chelsea, Spurs.
Well, look, I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, Tottenham have got a track record of hiring Chelsea managers, so you could see it from that point of view. Look, I mean, he's a young, progressive coach who needs a chance, and he would be happy to work within a budget that Spurs would operate with, and I imagine he'd be quite happy to get quite quickly back into the Premier League. So it's not impossible, but I think the bizarre thing is that Spurs would probably think they could do better than Graham Potter.
Well, that is certainly not the last time we had that discussion. James, what's that business card behind you, James? I've been trying to work it out as you were talking. Who are we giving free advertising to?
My plumber is just in my kitchen.
There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching ESPN FC on YouTube. For more highlights, analysis and exclusive content, be sure to subscribe.